Hello, I'm Kat from the Austin Nature and Science Center. Thanks for joining me for a TEKS Tuesday video. Based on these images you see around me, do you think we're going to talk about plants today or animals? You got it, we're going to talk about plants. Plants can look a lot of different ways. They can be specialized to live in certain environments, like succulents that can survive in the desert, or they could be really tall trees that can reach the way tops of rainforest canopies. So they can look a lot of different ways, but today we're going to focus on the typical flowering plant. We're going to use this kind of plant to think about the different parts that make up all plants. Let's look at a drawing of a plant to see if we can find the 4 main parts of the plant that help them survive. First, we're going to look above ground. So what do you see on this drawing here? There are 3 of the main parts just here. I can see the stem going up through the middle. I can see several leaves, and I can see a flower. So we have those 3 parts above ground. What about below ground? What is this? What are we looking at that's below ground on plants? Yeah, these are the roots. So all together, we have flower, leaves, stem, down to root system. Let's learn a little bit more about what each of those parts does to help plants survive. What do you think roots do for a plant? Remember where they are. They're underground, surrounded by soil. Do you remember what soil is made up of? It's made up of some non-living things like water, dirt, and minerals, and it's also made up of some living things like insects and broken down plant parts. So why do you think it's beneficial or good for roots to be surrounded by this? Well, it turns out that roots are responsible for pulling water and minerals into the plant. So it's a good thing they are surrounded by soil, which is made up partially of those things. Roots also have a really important job of anchoring the plant. So they create a steady base, a steady foundation. You can really see this in the picture of the tree roots where they're spreading out across the surface. So now that we know what the roots do for a plant, let's move above ground and think about the stem. Notice that the stem is directly attached to the leaves, the flowers, and the roots. What do you think that could mean about the job of a stem? Well, one of the really important jobs of a stem is pulling water up from the roots and dispersing it into the rest of the plant, moving it around the rest of the plant. Another really important job of stems is to provide structural support. So they give the plants their structure, their shape. Without a strong stem, a plant would just fall over. So we know that the roots of a plant gather water and minerals, and the stem moves those things around the plant and helps give it its shape. But what do the leaves do? Have you ever noticed that flowers can be all different colors, but leaves are almost always green? Do you think that's a coincidence, or do you think that happens for a reason? Well, it turns out that leaves are green because of a really important pigment called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is responsible for absorbing sunlight in through the leaves. And another thing that leaves do is they absorb carbon dioxide through tiny holes on the surface. And it turns out that sunlight and carbon dioxide are really important for how plants get their energy. Have you ever heard the word photosynthesis before? That's a really big word, so let's break it down into 2 parts. So first, photo means light, synthesis means to make, so photosynthesis really means making from light. And this is what plants do to get their energy. When they have carbon dioxide and sunlight, which they get through their leaves, and water, which they get through their roots, they're able to put those things together and create their own food. So if you or I are hungry, we can go eat a snack or eat a meal, but a hungry plant can just make its own food. This kind of helps explain how plants are so stationary. You know, roots give them their anchor, but they don't need to move because when they have those 3 things, carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water, they can create their own food. So it seems like you only need roots, a stem, and leaves for photosynthesis. So what do flowers do for plants? So it's true that flowers are not necessary for photosynthesis, but they are essential for plant reproduction. Believe it or not, plants have male and female parts, and they're inside of the flower. So this is showing us the pistil, or the female part of the flower, that includes that bottom section that was invisible because it was covered by the plant. So I made it so we could see that part. And then there's also the male part that we can see here, these kind of fuzzier looking bits. Those are part of the stamen. So pollination is what happens when pollen from the male part of a plant, from the stamen, gets onto the pistil or the female part of a plant. Those parts have to mix so that you can get new plants, you can produce new plants. And sometimes it can happen within the same flower and then you have a twin. And other times it happens when a pollinator, like a bee, brings pollen from another flower over to this flower. But those parts are necessary, and the top of the pistil here is called a stigma, and that's the part that receives the pollen. Once a flower has become pollinated or fertilized, it will actually turn into a fruit. When you think of fruit, you might think of apples and oranges, but fruits can actually look a lot of different ways. They can be squishy like a peach or hard like a pecan. But all fruits contain seeds, and seeds are what lead to new plants. So it turns out that all 4 of the major parts of plants, roots, stem, leaves, and flower, play really important roles in plant survival and reproduction. Roots anchor the plant and give it its sturdy base and also pulls in water and nutrients. Stems move that water through the plant and help give it its structure. Leaves absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide, and flowers are responsible for plant reproduction. We know that when plants have carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water, they can produce their own food through photosynthesis. And all the hard work that the plants do to make their own food actually creates oxygen, which you and I need to breathe. So all the hard work that plants do is really good for us too. Now let's see if we can identify those parts we just learned about on a real plant. I have here a few cuttings from a plant. So this isn't going to have a root system because it's not an entire living plant, but we can find the other 3 parts of a plant here. So number 1, notice the stem is the part that I'm holding. This gives this whole plant the structure that it needs. And then I see here there are clusters of leaves. Do you remember what job the leaves have? And then I see at the tip here, I see a flower. So you can see here it's got kind of a tube shape. On here, I can't really see the male or female parts, but we know that it's got one of those. So here we have stem, leaves, and flower. I have another plant that I'm going to use to show you roots. So this is a different kind of plant. This one is alive. It has a root system. So right there you can see those are the roots of this plant. It looks a little different than the drawings and the pictures we've looked at so far, but that's because this isn't a plant that just grew directly from a seed. This is actually a plant that is growing from a clipping from a different plant. So we can imagine that part's gone. And just like that, that's a root system, and we have stems and we have leaves, but there are no flowers on this plant. I wonder if you can go outside somewhere and try to find plants to identify their main parts. Because it is the winter, we might not be able to find flowers on lots of plants. And because roots are underground, you might not be able to see them unless you're looking at a tree that has big roots that you can see on the surface. But you can definitely find the leaf and the stems of different plants. And maybe you can even find the buds of flowering plants. So here we can see these pink flowers, but then there are also these purple bits here that are the buds that are showing us where more flowers are going to sprout. So maybe you could look for buds too. Those will become flowers on a plant. Well, thank you for joining me for this Teaks Tuesday video. I hope you learned a lot. I'll see you next time. Head over to our Facebook page to see more awesome daily videos posted.